Imagine your boss catching you manually typing data into a spreadsheet, right? And as a penalty, they just instantly delete your team's entire month of research, shut the project down, and lock your budget.
Yeah, I mean, in most companies, that level of retaliation sounds completely insane.
Utterly insane. But in the organization we are studying today, it is literally a built-in survival mechanism.
Right, because they view manual data entry not just as like a slight inefficiency. They view it as a systemic threat to human cognitive capacity. It is treated with the same severity as a critical security breach.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are super thrilled to have you with us because the source material sitting right in front of us is, well, it's unlike any corporate document you have probably ever seen.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating.
It's an internal memo titled the Operational Architecture and Infrastructure Refactoring Roadmap. And our mission for you today is to basically decode this framework. We are looking at a chief engineering officer who evaluates their entire operational system, not just by, server uptime or profit margins.
Right. They're mathematically calculating the cognitive load and the metabolic boundaries of their own team.
Yes. Treating human energy and daily friction as strict, quantifiable variables in a literal equation.
And if those variables exceed a certain threshold, the entire system is designed to just halt.
So let's set the scene using the actual opening lines of this memo, because right off the bat, it pulls you into this mindset. It reads, quote, "Systems are online, the ledger is synchronized, and the chief capacity officer has established the metabolic boundaries."
A chief capacity officer, just think about that.
Right. Someone whose entire job is to police metabolic boundaries. We are looking at a hyper-disciplined, almost sci-fi environment here. But to even begin optimizing this kind of human energy, this organization first has to stop the silent bleeding happening in their underlying systems.
Right, and that underlying bleed is what they identify as infrastructure debt, which is represented in the memo by the variable I sub D. And the foundational mandate of this roadmap is transitioning the entire organization to a declarative infrastructure state, which is priority 1.
Build authorized. Right, that's the status.
Exactly. And to understand why this is such a priority, we kind of have to look at how traditional IT operates mechanically, because in most environments, engineers use an imperative approach.
Meaning they write scripts with step-by-step instructions, like download this software, open this firewall port, start this service.
Right. And if one step fails, the whole script crashes, and then an engineer has to step in to manually troubleshoot.
Which they call manual break-fix operations. It basically requires an engineer to hold the entire system architecture in their head just to patch a hole, like duct taping a leaky pipe.
Yeah, and a declarative state flips that mechanism entirely. So instead of scripting the how, the engineer simply declares the what.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
Well, they write a configuration file that just states, we need a database running on this specific port with this much memory. And the orchestration system itself figures out the underlying steps to make reality match that declared state.
Wow. So if a server crashes,
the system realizes reality no longer matches the declaration, and it automatically spins up a new server without any human intervention at all.
it completely shifts the paradigm of maintenance. I mean, manual break fix is like giving a driver turn-by-turn directions, right? Where one wrong turn or a road closure ruins the entire trip and you have to pull over and recalculate.
Yeah, exactly.
But declarative infrastructure is like giving an autonomous car a GPS pin. You just tell it where to go, and the system dynamically figures out the how on its own.
And by removing the human from that turn-by-turn navigation of the network, they force two critical variables down. Cognitive load, which they label C, and friction, labeled F.
Right, because the engineer is no longer waking up at 3:00 a.m. to restart a crashed server.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really fascinating execution mandate tied to this new foundation.
Yes, the recursive scan. I wanted to get your take on this. So to finalize this transition, the CEO orders a scan of the entire network, specifically the directories labeled /brain, which acts as their central knowledge base, and /prod, their live production environment.
Right, and the order is to relentlessly hunt down and purge legacy strings.
Yeah, and they specifically target two terms, Home Lab and Technical Earth.
They are running a literal search and destroy mission on their own internal vocabulary.
Right. I really need to unpack the psychology of this with you. Why expend valuable engineering resources to hunt down seemingly innocent words? I mean, Home Lab is just a colloquial term for a server someone built in their garage. Why treat it like a virus that needs to be scrubbed from the code base?
Because language dictates organizational reality. I mean, A home lab is a hobbyist environment. It is where you tinker.
Right.
If a server goes offline in a home lab, it doesn't matter because...
The stakes are non-existent.
Exactly. The stakes are zero. So when an engineer refers to a production system as a home lab, they are subconsciously giving themselves permission to treat it with less rigor. They are allowing that mindset of messy, localized manual tinkering to bleed into an environment that demands absolute precision.
Wow. So by deleting the word, you delete the behavior.
Exactly.
And technical Earth, what's the deal with that one?
Well, in systems engineering, referring to something as Earth implies it is grounded, heavy and bound by physical constraints. But they want an architecture that is completely abstracted and infinitely scalable.
So purging these terms forces a cultural reboot.
It forces the engineers to realize they're no longer operating in a casual startup phase. They are operating a standardized, automated enterprise machine.
But here's where that perfect machine runs into reality, right? If they have built this flawlessly automated utopia to stop infrastructure rot, what happens when they introduce something completely unmapped?
Like new research.
Exactly. By definition, experimental research is chaotic. It threatens to break that perfect system and reintroduce the exact human friction they literally just eradicated.
And that tension is the core of their second initiative, which is labeled EAP Empirical Validation.
Where they are running 30-day sprints to conduct academic modeling. The memo lists 3 specific studies: MTTI, STAMP, and cognitive friction. Let's contextualize those studies quickly for you listening. In IT frameworks, MTTI usually stands for mean time to identify, meaning how long it takes a system to realize something is wrong.
Yeah, and STAMP is a well-known systems engineering model that looks at accidents and failures not as broken parts, but as complex system interactions.
So they are literally researching how their own systems fail and how that creates cognitive friction.
Exactly. Now, the status of this initiative is build authorized, but it carries a very heavy warning label. It says provisional.
Provisional, right. Because the CEO states that the moderate cognitive load of doing this complex research is only acceptable because it is being offset by automated data pipelines.
And to prove this, they actually drop a mathematical formula directly into the roadmap.
The force index calculation.
Yeah.
I love this part. The equation is written out as E equals R sub A divided by, and then in parentheses, C med plus F with a downward arrow.
Yeah, so let's look at the mechanics of that math. E is the force index, representing total energy or efficiency output. R sub A is the actualized results, so the valuable output of the research.
Okay, got it.
You divide those results by the denominator, which is CMED, the moderate cognitive load required to do the intellectual heavy lifting, plus F with a downward arrow, which represents decreasing friction.
Meaning, if your daily friction goes up, the denominator of that equation swells. And mathematically, a larger denominator means your overall efficiency basically plummets towards zero.
Exactly. The only way to keep the equation balanced when you are engaged in heavy intellectual work is to force the friction variable down to an absolute minimum.
And the method they use to force that friction down is downright draconian. I mean, the memo outlines a critical constraint for these 30-day research sprints.
Oh, yeah.
It dictates that all telemetry, all the data from these models, must be ingested natively via Google Apps scripts into their asset inventory. And then comes the warning, which is, quote, manual entry of research data is strictly prohibited and will trigger a retrospective veto.
A retrospective veto. That means if the system detects manual data entry, the entire sprint is invalidated. The work is rolled back.
I have to legitimately challenge this, though. Let's look at the real-world application here. Writing a custom API script that perfectly scrapes data from 3 distinct academic models and routes it into a database without breaking, that can take days of high-level, frustrating engineering work.
Sure, it's not trivial.
But having a junior team member just type the numbers into a spreadsheet takes 20 minutes at the end of the day. Plus, this is a provisional 30-day sprint. It's temporary. Why spend $1 to save a dime? The return on investment for automating a short-term project just seems completely broken to me.
Well, you are looking at time as a flat measurement.
Okay, how much should I look at?
The Chief Capacity Officer looks at time as a carrier wave for cognitive energy. If you have an engineer manually entering data for 20 minutes, you are not just losing 20 minutes of the clock. You are introducing context switching. You are forcing a mind that was previously engaged in deep, high-level system analysis to suddenly perform low-level, repetitive transcription.
Which I guess introduces the probability of human error, too, corrupting the data set.
Exactly. But beyond the typos, it is a systemic drain. Manual toil is a recurring tax on the human mind. The upfront cost of writing the automation script is steep, yes, but it is a fixed one-time cost.
And the moment it is written, the friction drops to zero.
Right. The organization enforces the zero-tolerance policy precisely because even temporary manual toil degrades the metabolic profile of the team. If they allow engineers to brute force the data entry just because it's a short sprint, they are compromising the very cognitive capacity required to analyze the research in the first place.
Okay, that actually makes the retrospective veto make sense. They aren't punishing the team for being lazy, they are quarantining the project because the data was gathered using an unsustainable expenditure of human energy.
It is a protective measure, pure and simple.
And we see exactly what happens when a highly anticipated project runs headfirst into this protective measure and fails the test.
Oh, yes, the Web3 pivot.
Which brings us to the most dramatic part of the roadmap, Initiative 3, the Web3 and DAO pivot. It's labeled a tactical strike. Now, for context, Web3 is the frontier of decentralized internet technology, and a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, is essentially an entity governed by smart contracts on a blockchain instead of a traditional corporate board.
Right.
It is the definition of cutting edge. Yet, the status of this pivot in the memo is refactor required, and then in all caps, veto. Full stop.
And the engineering justification for this veto perfectly illustrates everything we've been talking about. The CEO halts the pivot due to a, quote, massive F&C spike.
A massive friction and cognitive load spike. The memo details that relying on manual ENS setup, that's the Ethereum name service, which turns long, complicated crypto addresses into readable names and manual wallet configurations, it creates an unsustainable spike in metabolic deficit.
Yeah, anyone who has interacted with Web3 understands exactly what this CEO is talking about. The underlying blockchain technology might be revolutionary, but the current user experience is incredibly hostile.
It really is. Setting up wallets requires managing cryptographic seed phrases, switching between different network chains, and manually calculating fluctuating gas fees just to execute a basic transaction.
It is exhausting.
It's like buying a state-of-the-art million-dollar electric sports car, but discovering that to actually drive the thing, you have to get out and manually hand crank the engine for 10 minutes every time you want to go to the grocery store.
That's exactly it. The engine is from the future, but the steering wheel is from the 1800s, and this organization flatly refuses to hand crank the engine.
But the veto goes deeper than just the clunky user experience, right?
It does. The CEO points to a severe architectural vulnerability, the sovereign index.
Yes. The memo states that using external IPFS or fleet gateways without native automation drops their sovereign index, or S sub I, below the 60% safety threshold. Let's break down those mechanics for you listening.
Sure.
IPFS stands for the Interplanetary File System. It's a decentralized peer-to-peer network for storing and sharing data. And Fleek is a company that provides a web interface, a gateway, making it easier to upload files to that decentralized network.
Right. So in a standard workflow, a developer logs into the Fleek website, clicks a few buttons, and uploads their files to IPFS. But by doing that, they're relying on Fleek's graphical interface to manage their infrastructure.
They are outsourcing their operations to a third-party dashboard.
Which means they surrender their sovereignty. If Fleek's website goes offline, or if they just change their user interface, the manual process breaks entirely.
Wow.
To a chief engineering officer focused on total systemic control, relying on an external gateway without building your own automated programmatic connection to the protocol is just an unacceptable security flaw. It drops the sovereign index right into the danger zone.
So if external gateways are the vulnerability, it sounds like their only option is to build their own custom pipes directly to the protocol. Is that what the refactoring requirements actually demand?
It is exactly what they demand. To lift a veto, the architect must implement ingress automation. Specifically, they must use Google Apps scripts to natively ingest threat intelligence feeds from platforms like Cantina and Immunify.
Now, Cantina and Immunify are massive platforms in the Web3 space for security audits and bug bounties. We're talking about platforms where discovering a vulnerability in a smart contract can literally result in $1 million payout. The stakes for monitoring these feeds are incredibly high.
And if an engineer is manually checking those platforms for security alerts, they are eventually going to miss something, or they're going to suffer extreme alert fatigue.
Right.
The ingress automation ensures that threat intelligence flows directly into their internal asset inventory without a human ever having to refresh a browser page. It just removes the human from the critical path of failure entirely.
And along with that automation, the CEO demands a debt neutralizer to clean up legacy strings in the Web3 bridge.
Yeah.
But honestly, It is the final requirement for lifting this veto that is the most fascinating to me from a corporate psychology standpoint.
Oh, you mean the enterprise reframing requirement?
Yes, the memo aggressively dictates that all Phase 1 escape terminology must be completely purged from the project.
Yeah.
The entire initiative must be renamed to Tier 1.2 Infrastructure Transition in order to meet Fortune 500 standards.
Which circles directly back to our discussion about the word home lab.
It is the exact same mechanism. Phase 1 escape sounds like a sci-fi rebellion. It evokes this image of a scrappy team of hackers trying to break out of the Matrix.
Yeah.
That carries this highly romantic, rebellious energy.
And that rebellious pirate energy is precisely what the CEO intends to crush here.
Crush it. Just absolutely squash it.
Because in the life cycle of any major technology operation, there is an inflection point where the pirate ship must become a navy. Phase 1 escape is the language of fast-moving, rule-breaking disruptors. But you cannot scale a massive, secure, highly automated enterprise architecture on pirate energy.
You need relentless discipline.
You need boring, predictable standardization. By forcing the team to rename their exciting Web3 pivot to the incredibly dry Tier 1.2 infrastructure transition, the CEO strips away the startup romance. They are forcing the engineering team to grow up and operate with real corporate maturity.
It is ruthless,
Yeah.
but it is undeniably brilliant. Because the team hasn't met these standards yet, the CEO concludes the Web3 section with a definitive ruling. The energy for this pivot remains locked in escrow.
Locked in escrow.
They absolutely refuse to authorize compute energy for a plan that trades operational security for architectural complexity.
Treating human focus and effort like financial capital that is legally withheld until the underlying contract conditions are met, it is a staggering mental model for managing a team's bandwidth.
It really is. And that brings us to the conclusion of this roadmap. For you listening right now, the core takeaways here extend way beyond software architecture. This memo is a masterclass in protecting your own metabolic boundaries.
Absolutely.
The ultimate lesson is that innovation, whether you are running complex data models or adopting cutting-edge decentralized technology, is only truly valuable if it doesn't crush your underlying system. If your shiny new project requires you to constantly hand crank the engine, it's not an upgrade. It is a liability.
A liability that will eventually drain your cognitive capacity down to absolute zero.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought drawn directly from the last lines of the source text. The memo actually ends on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, the very last line is a pointed, uncompromising question from the chief engineering officer, directed at the architect and the intelligence director. It simply reads, quote, "What is the current status of the Fleek automation script required to unlock the Web3 egress?"
Basically saying, I am not unlocking your toys until you build the automation.
Exactly. And I challenge you to apply this concept to your own daily life and your own workflows. What if we started treating our daily focus, our limited mental bandwidth, as compute energy that we hold in escrow?
Refusing to spend it on manual break fix.
Imagine flatly refusing to authorize your own effort for a new project, a new tool, or a new routine until the messy, repetitive, manual parts of that task were fully automated, delegated, or removed entirely. How much cognitive friction could you eliminate from your day if you demanded an automation script before you allowed yourself to even begin?
Because when we evaluate our own output, we usually look at a simple spreadsheet of hours worked and tasks checked off. We measure the input and the output, but we completely ignore the friction grinding down the machine in the middle.
We really do.
Maybe it is time we establish our own metabolic boundaries, stop using duct tape on our processes, and refuse to authorize the build until the system is truly sound. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.